I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Global Book Network, we're uncovering one of the most mysterious and controversial theories of our time. The name of the book, Tipping Point for a Hollow Earth. It's written by a terrific author. Her name is Ruth Leedy Carr, and in the book, she explores the startling possibility of an Earth axis shift and the silence of science and the media surrounding it. It is backed by the top names in science, and this book dares to challenge mainstream narratives about Earth, Mars, and the fate of humanity. We're delighted to have this wonderfully talented author join us here today. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for making it possible, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her amazing book. The links are below this interview. Ruth, thank you so much for joining me here today. It's my pleasure. This is a terrific book, very, very unique in its perspective and backed by science. Let's start out at the beginning. What first sparked your interest in the hollow earth theory?
Well, I was interested in the prophecies of Edgar Cayce, as reported in Edgar Cayce, The Sleeping Prophet, I just turned. And when I ran across a book called Hollow Earth, I decided to read it just out of curiosity. And it seemed to answer the questions that were left hanging, the mystery that were posed in the Edgar Cayce prophecy, especially regarding the appearance of a light in the cloud around the same time that the Earth's axis was going to shift. And it just seemed like that this prophecy could be referring to the light of the inner sun shining up through a newly formed polar hole formed by centrifugal force in an axis shift. And the fit was so good that I decided, well, I'm going to see if I can prove it. And that was took a lot more trouble. You know, the basic idea was easy to get to, but proving it was a lot harder.
Absolutely. Talk to us a little bit about how Edgar Cayce's prophecies tie into your research.
Cayce prophesied that the upper portion of Europe will be changed as in the twinkling of an eye. And this was the prophecy that disturbs me the most, because it seems like it could be referring to the formation of a new pole, or, you know, even a new polar hole, if you want to go that far with it. But it just seemed like this was the most ominous prophecy, and yet the people of Europe apparently had no idea that this was a prospect. Well, I mean, if I could prove it was true, it would be something that would be very important for the people of Europe to know about. And as I studied further, I realized that if Northern Europe were the site of a new pole, well, the axis of rotation, then the equator would fall near Japan and Western California. Mm. And the prophecy for Japan and Western California both involve a rise in sea level. Mm. And that's what you would expect that at the new equator. When the equatorial bulge moved up to the new equator, you would get a rise in sea level. And so the Cayce prophecy for Japan was the greater portion of Japan must go into the sea. Or maybe it should have said the sea must come up over the greater portion of Japan. That's the way I read it anyway. And also it was prophesied that there would be a great many volcanic eruptions in the area of the equator, tropical area. That would include the old equator and the new equator, because the change in the equatorial bulge would set off volcanoes in both areas. You know, as the equatorial bulge would diminish in one area and increase in another area, both of those processes would cause volcanic eruptions, disturbing the magma chambers of the volcano.
Gotcha.
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
For the main things that concerned me, I also noticed that the new equator, if a pole were in Northern Europe, would be the new southern pole, actually, because because this would involve the reversal of the Earth's magnetic field. But anyway, if there were a pole in northern Europe, then the equator would also go near southern Africa, South Africa. So that would be another area that would receive flooding. So those were the main areas that concerned me.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. Why do you believe an Earth axis shift is imminent?
Because geomagnetic field reversals could happen in our time. There are several predictions. For instance, Gerard Versur's book, Cosmic Catastrophes. In there, he says the reversal could start in 50 to 150 years. And his book came out in 1978. Mm-hmm. So the 50 years are just about up. That's one prediction. And then there was Walter Sullivan's prediction in continents in motion, and new Earth today. I believe he said in the next few centuries. That could be any time. But the prediction that was the most impressive came from The Evolution of Earth's Magnetic Field, which is an article by Jeremy Bloxham and David Zubin in the Scientific American, December 1989, in which they said if a new hotspot arises near Indonesia and starts traveling down to join the other two hotspots that have made the trip from Indonesia down toward southern Indian Ocean and the southern Atlantic Ocean. If a third hotspot were to arrive near Indonesia and start making its journey, that in itself would set off the reversal of Earth's magnetic field. Which would redirect the solar wind to the new magnetic pole. It's the solar wind, it really requires an outside force to set the axis. And the solar wind is absolutely the only candidate. And it does define the axis that we have today. So it can be seen in the photographs of the aurora borealis and the aurora australis, which bring the axis. In other words, the impact of the solar wind is it forms a ring around it, centered at the axis. Under the hollow Earth theory, the reason it doesn't actually hit the axis is that there's no land at the axis. But the fact that it is centered perfectly at the axis pretty well tells you that it is defining the axis we have today. And so if the magnetic poles were to reform in a reverse position, with the northern magnetic pole forming somewhere in the southern hemisphere and vice versa, the solar wind would then be deflected by the magnetic field to hit those new magnetic poles and would define a new axis at those new magnetic poles. It's just kind of self-evident. Now there are two pieces of evidence that this is true. One was a story by CBS News on January the 20th, 2000, in which they said the fast reversal of Earth's magnetic field had resulted in the Earth rolling. They put it actually, they meant rotating in a different way, because they said the latitude of Washington, D.C., or that area, was greatly changed as a result of this geomagnetic field reversal, which occurred 80 million years ago. What that really tells you, they didn't bother to tell the viewers that a geomagnetic field reversal is on its way today, that it's been approaching for 2,500 years, as evidenced by the decline in the magnetic field. And this is shown by Bloxham and Zubin very clearly in their graph, how the strength of the field had gone down and ascending curve pretty much. It's not anywhere near zero, but it doesn't have to reach the 0 point before the reversal takes place. And so,
well, it's fascinating. It truly is. And you've done your homework, your research, no doubt. Let's talk about this. What role does Mars play in the instability of our solar system?
Well, I don't think it plays a great role because it doesn't have a strong gravitational pull like Jupiter does. Because Jupiter is reputed to be perhaps have been responsible for destroying the planet that used to exist beyond Mars. You know, that the gravity of Jupiter was so strong that it destabilized that planet and caused it to fall into asteroids. Mars, Mars isn't massive enough to really cause an effect like that. But it threatens, if it falls apart, it threatens our planet. The pieces of it would threaten us. And the reason I think it might fall apart is that it no longer has magnetic poles. And the solar wind comes down and strikes the magnetic poles of Earth and causes changes in the rotation that really pushes rotation along. And this can be seen at times of solar storm. After, say, 3 days after a solar storm, this extra strong solar wind will strike at our magnetic poles on Earth and cause a surge in the rotation rate, which tells you that the solar wind is always pushing it on the magnetic poles, but when it doesn't cause a change in rotation rate, it may appear that the rotation is just constant. But the fact that the solar wind is always hitting the magnetic poles, and particularly in a particularly obvious way when the power is increased, and you can really notice it. So that tells you that our planet's rotation is being sustained by the solar wind, whereas Mars, since it no longer has magnetic poles, is not receiving that push at the magnetic pole, which, it's the solar wind that strikes everywhere on the planet equally, which is probably what's happening. That's not going to sustain rotation. And so it worries me that Mars is probably losing rotation speed a lot faster than Earth, because it's not getting any rotation isn't being sustained. And so, I can't really prove how close we are to a crisis as far as Mars actually falling apart. Now, NASA has discovered a planet shaped like a collapsed football. This was announced last summer. But that's exactly the shape that I would expect Mars would assume if it stopped rotating fast enough to remain, for the shell to remain in orbit around the central sun. If it lost enough rotation speed that it couldn't maintain its hollow shape, then the equatorial portion would cave in first because it's within it. And we know that because a spheroidal planetary nebula has the same shape as you would expect with a hollow planet. The planetary nebula has a central star, and it has a rotating shell, which is thinner and it's later than a pole. So if the Earth is shaped in that way, or say if Mars is shaped in that way, and it loses rotation speed for the reasons like planes, then the equatorial portion would cave in, and you get this it constricts in the middle, and it would look like a collapsed football. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's really fascinating how one planet affects another planet, and it can be quite frightening when you look at it. Let me ask you this, though. Can you explain the significance of the lighted polar hole on Mars?
Well, the rotating shell of any hollow planet would have openings of holes because you can't have matter stationary at that. Rotating matter has to be going around in a circle. It has to actually be moving. So you can't have a solid polar area if the cell, if the hole is rotating, hollow cell is rotating. So that's why there would have to be polar holes on any hollow planet. And so if there's a sun inside around which the shell is rotating, then that sun will be able to shine up through that polar hole. And actually, some of the early photos of Mars show a really bright area at the pole. And it was always said by the experts that, oh, this is the ice cap. But there was never, absolutely never any examination of no actual evidence to indicate that was ice. And it's in Marshall Gardner's book, Journey to the Earth's Interior. He took these same photos and he said, well, this is obviously the light of the central sun shining through a polar ocean. And the way it protrudes precludes it being the possibility of being snow or ice. So that was his opinion. Of course, he wasn't a recognized expert, but anyway, well, it's plausible. Let's put it this way. It's plausible to look at these pictures and think, well, all right, it looks as though it could be a hollow object with a light inside shining up through a polar hole. It looks like it could be that. And for the experts to just simply say, oh, it's ice and nothing else is possible, that was never a scientifically acceptable type of verdict. They're supposed to keep an open mind until they actually have evidence.
Right. Supposed to dismiss it out of hand. You have a letter that you said you could share with our viewers regarding the light on the night side of Mars?
Yes. My congressman, Wayne Gilchrist, forwarded a report of mine to NASA back in 2001. And NASA sent a letter back on the 17th of August. And I'm prepared. I didn't include the actual picture of the letter in either one of my books. Maybe I should have, but I'm prepared to send this letter to anybody who is curious as to what NASA's position is. Actually, NASA refused to comment about the polar light. And yet they said, oh, well, we can't be bothered arguing the theories that people send us. But then they went ahead and argued their position that Mars was solid. Yes. So if they would have just said, we can't comment and then said goodbye, that would have been consistent. But then for them to go ahead and try to argue the case and drag out other evidence and ignore the photographic evidence, it just seems to me unacceptable. But anyway, if anyone wants to see this letter and also Congressman's letter to me, and I can also include some pictures. My address is P.O. Box 686, Preston, Maryland 21655. And Ruth Leedy Carr, CARR.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that information. I think the people out there who are truly interested would want more information like that. Let's talk a little bit about Isaac Asimov and Carl Sagan and how they support your predictions.
Well, one of the first anagram messages that Asimov did was a planetary head of state by the name of Hober Mallow. And he took this name in his a later novel, Foundation's Edge. He had a character refer to Hober Mallow's and Salvo Harding. In other words, he pluralized the name Hober Mallow in the 82 novel. So what that did was that created the letters necessary to make this message Mars B hollow. And it's a very nice anagram because every letter is used exactly once. And it's a very short message. And the man was portrayed as a planetary head of state, which means he's a very fitting symbol of the planet, being a head of state. And so that's one of the best statements about hollow Mars that Asimov made. He didn't come out at any point and say Mars is hollow. Actually, in one of his novels, he had a phrase where he said that a thunderstorm's noise rattled across a hollow world. That was that was used in his novel, The Robots of Dawn. So, and there were a couple of other good anagrams in that book. I mean, I could go on and on about the anagrams. It's really hard to prove that any one of them is valid. The best proof that he was doing anagrams is where he used his wife's name. Her name was Janet Jepson, and he took her first name and changed it to Pajon, and took Jepson and made Popfest out of that, using each letter once. And so then he added 3 more letters at the end for a third name. And this name was used in his final novel, which was published after his death. So the character's name was Sagan Hopkins Lee, Lie. And but this was an example that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was doing anagrams. Because it's not an accident that his wife's name turns up in such a clear fashion. And there's 2 other good anagrams in there. Animal, a tiger and a camel. You did anagrams of those 2 things in the same book. So I felt like that those examples were his way of proving to the beginner, as it were, that yes, I am good at anagrams and I can do them, and I'm going to do a lot of them. And for anyone who may be doubting that he did, and he even did a coded message, which is, I don't know if you're interested in that, but it was the letters adjacent to commas and apostrophes in his story Frustration. By writing those letters down, I was able to come up with 3 names for his novel Nemesis. Huh. So that was proof positive that he had done a secret message. The trouble with his wife's name is that could be dismissed as attempt to honor his wife. But when he created these 3 names, Mary, Merry, and then Tessa, Dessa, and Renee, Ranay, in the letters adjacent to commas and apostrophes in his novel, his story Frustration from the Gold collection, that was something that was really beyond the realm of coincidence. I mean, if he was gonna produce 3 names, at least if it was going to be a coincidence, at least they wouldn't have been all from the same novel.
Right, exactly.
And in that situation, you don't really expect to see many words beyond the accidental 3-letter word here and there, maybe a 4-letter word, but there was another 5-letter word, help, CELTS, in that same list. And so, there's more. I did more with this secret message. The main thing that you can get from this secret message is, well, number one, he would like you to read the novel Nemesis.
Right.
But the main thing that he's really telling you with the secret message is that he wasn't free to tell you everything he wanted to. There were some secrets he couldn't tell you for whatever reason, and that's kind of incomprehensible to most of us because he wrote so much. He was the most prolific author ever.
Wow.
To think that he couldn't say something that he wanted to say just seems improbable. But when you find this message that tells you, yes, I have something to tell you that I wasn't able to express during my life. And if you study this message, maybe you can figure it out.
Yeah.
And I've studied it, but I can't explain it quickly.
It's amazing. It's like piecing together a puzzle, of course. Let me ask you this. What would be the global consequences of a pole shift?
Well, here's what worries me pretty much more than anything, is that the new equatorial belt is going to set off some volcanoes. And in the western part of the United States, there are quite a few large volcanoes. I just had the book out yesterday, but The most worrisome one is the Yellowstone Park supervolcano, which the magma chamber is full. And now, this is not located very close to the coast of California, fortunately. I mean, if it were located right there in California, I'd say, watch out, because if that volcano were sufficiently, diddled and disturbed, it's close enough to a grand eruption already that it would be liable to blow, and it could cover most of the United States with a layer of ash that would kill people and make it impossible to fly airplanes and operate cars and go pop. It would just cause lung damage. It would just destroy a lot of things, a lot of people.
Cataclysmic event, no doubt. And it is very frightening. Your book is so important that people pick it up, read it, that it gets into the right hands as well, where people can. Is there anything we can do? I mean, that's a question I have. I mean, this seems like, yeah, I guess to prepare or prevent. I don't think preventing it is possible, right?
Um, I don't think many of our scientists have the ability to prevent it, but the if we were able to contact, if our leaders were able to contact the authorities in the interior of the earth, they might be able to make a change in the fine people. I have no idea, but they're the ones. They're the ones that I believe who are keeping the lid on the news. Oh, so, and they're the ones that may have some control over when it happens.
Well, we're glad you're pulling back the curtain with your book. That's for sure. The name of the book is Tipping Point for a Hollow Earth, how Asimov and Sagan backed my prophecy of a polar shift to Europe. It's a fascinating book. A lot of it's frightening. All of it is backed up by research and science. Take a look at it, make some informed decisions. And this book is highly recommended. Ruth, thank you so much for joining us here today. I appreciate your time, your insight, and your wisdom. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford for GBN. So long for now.